For 3 years, he sat alone at table 4. Never spoke, never smiled. Just an old man with silver hair and a limp, who ordered the same breakfast every single morning and left exactly $5 tucked under his napkin. Most people barely noticed him, just another quiet fixture in a small-town diner. But Sarah Martinez did. She didn't rush him, didn't judge his silence. She served him with warmth, not expectation. Then one morning, table 4 sat empty, and when 6 Navy SEALs walked through the door carrying a folded flag, Sarah's world changed forever. The man she thought was nobody had left her everything. The diner was a simple place, just a squat building nestled at the corner of Route 17 and Cedar Street. It was a pit stop for the early morning crowd, construction workers with dust on their boots, truckers nursing black coffee before long hauls, and graveyard shift workers grabbing something warm before heading home to sleep. The regulars came and went with the rhythm of the rising sun, but one man had never broken that rhythm. Not once in 3 years. Every weekday at exactly 6 a.m., he would appear at the glass door. Never late, never early. Just on time. The staff didn't know his name. They simply referred to him as the quiet guy at table 4. He sat by the window, always in the same seat, his gaze often fixed on the growing blur of traffic outside. Sarah Martinez had been working the morning shift since her husband passed away, leaving her with 2 young kids to raise alone. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and let her be home by the time her children got out of school. She'd taken the job out of necessity, but found small moments of meaning within it, moments like serving the quiet man at table 4. When she first started, Sarah had made an effort to connect with every customer. Most were happy to chat about the weather, sports, or their next shift. But this man was different. He looked to be in his 70s, with hair like steel wool and hands lined with decades of labor. He walked with a faint limp, favoring his right leg, and he always wore the same gray jacket, no matter the season. Each morning followed the same quiet ritual. He would nod politely when Sarah approached, never speaking a word. She'd ask, "The usual?" And he'd give a second subtle nod. 2 eggs over easy. Wheat toast, black coffee. He ate slowly, methodically, with deliberate motions, and he never once asked for anything different. His eyes often wandered toward the street, never staring at people, just watching the world pass by through the glass. His bill always came to $8.50, and every time, without fail, he left $13.50 on the table. A $5 tip, generous for such a modest meal, but it was the way he left it that stood out. He'd fold the bill into a precise square, tucking it beneath the edge of his napkin as if hiding it there with purpose. Sarah noticed the little things. The way he always carried a neatly folded gray handkerchief, placing it carefully on his lap before eating. Once, a gust from the front door blew it to the floor. Sarah bent to retrieve it and caught a glimpse of small, embroidered letters along the hem. J. Carter, U.S. Navy. From that day forward, in her mind, she began calling him Mr. Carter. She never said it aloud. Something in his quiet presence suggested he valued privacy, and Sarah respected that. Other waitresses weren't so generous in their interpretations. "Creepy old guy," one had whispered, "never says a word, just sits there staring." But Sarah didn't see creepiness. She saw loneliness. She saw a man whose silence wasn't threatening. It was tired. A man who came not just for the food, but for the consistency, the dignity of being seen without being interrogated. And so, she kept his coffee hot, refilled his cup before he had to ask, and always greeted him with a gentle, "See you tomorrow, sir," as he slipped out the door. And every time, without fail, he would nod. A small gesture, but there was warmth behind it, enough to let her know he appreciated the kindness. 3 years. 3 years of this quiet companionship, of folded tips and silent thanks. Sarah never guessed the truth, that the man at table 4 had once commanded elite teams on classified missions around the world. That he was Captain James Carter, a retired Navy SEAL, decorated for valor and leadership in places the news never mentioned. She never knew about the medals locked away in a drawer, or the young men who owed their lives to his decisions. That, to her, he was just a decent man who didn't want to be forgotten. Then came Tuesday. At 6 a.m., Sarah was wiping down the booths, preparing for the morning crowd, when she glanced at table 4. Empty. Unusual, but maybe he was running late. She checked the clock. 6:35, 6:40, still no sign of him. A small knot of unease tightened in her chest. In 3 years, he had never been late. Never missed a morning, except on holidays when the diner was closed. His routine was more precise than any alarm clock. Still, people got sick. Maybe he just needed a day. But Wednesday came, and the chair remained empty. Thursday, Sarah found herself automatically setting a place, silverware, napkin, and a coffee cup, before realizing what she was doing and quietly removing it. The staff noticed her distraction. "You okay, Sarah?" asked Melissa, the afternoon manager. Sarah offered a distracted smile. "Just wondering about a regular. He hasn't been in." Melissa shrugged. "Probably found a cheaper breakfast. Or maybe he realized how weird it is to sit alone every day for 3 years." But Sarah knew better. It wasn't about cost or comfort. Something was wrong. Friday morning brought an unusually slow breakfast rush. Sarah was restocking the coffee station when she heard the low, steady rumble of a large vehicle in the lot. Through the window, she saw a black SUV pulling in. Government plates. 6 men stepped out, dressed in formal Navy dress blues, their uniforms crisp and adorned with medals. They moved with the confident precision of military men still in active service. Their faces were solemn, calm, but purposeful. As they entered, the diner fell to a hush. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks hovered above plates. 6 uniformed Navy men walking into a quiet roadside diner was not something anyone expected to see that morning. The man leading them was tall, maybe in his 40s. He had the look of command, broad-shouldered, upright, with a steady gaze. He scanned the room, then locked eyes with Sarah. He approached the counter, his voice respectful but firm. "Excuse me, are you Sarah Martinez?" Sarah's heart skipped. A strange chill settled in her bones. She'd been through enough to know. When men in uniform ask for you by name, it's never just small talk. She nodded, her voice catching slightly. "Yes, that's me." The officer reached into his coat and produced a tightly folded flag, reverently held. "Ma'am," he said softly, "Captain James Carter requested, in writing, that should anything happen to him, we deliver this to you, along with his last letter and his final will." Sarah froze. The room blurred around her. The quiet man from table 4, the one no one else noticed, had written her name into his final wishes. The officer continued. "He spoke highly of you, ma'am. Said you were the only person in years who treated him with quiet dignity. He left something else, too." He handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was a handwritten note in a clean, slanted script. "Thank you for seeing me, Sarah. Not for who I was, but for who I tried to be in the end. The house is yours. So is the pension. Make a better life for those kids. You deserve it. J. Carter." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. She clutched the letter to her chest, overwhelmed. The man everyone else ignored had been watching, listening. And in his own silent way, he had repaid a small kindness with a life-altering gift. The diner would never be the same. Table 4 would never be just a table again. But every morning, Sarah would pour an extra cup of coffee, set it at that empty place, and whisper, "See you tomorrow, sir." Because some men don't need words to leave the loudest echo. "Yes, I'm Sarah Martinez. Is everything okay?" Sarah's voice wavered slightly, the weight of the moment pressing into her chest like a storm building behind her ribs. The officer nodded solemnly and reached into his jacket. From inside, he pulled out a small, polished wooden box, no larger than a jewelry case, and delicately draped with a neatly folded American flag. The sight of that flag alone made Sarah's stomach twist into knots. "Ma'am," the man said gently, "my name is Commander Richards. We're here about Captain James Carter. I believe you knew him as a customer here." The words hit her like a wave crashing through her, sudden, cold, and overwhelming. "And Captain Carter, is he—" she managed, the words catching in her throat. "Yes, ma'am. Captain Carter passed away Monday evening, peacefully, in his sleep." Tears sprang to Sarah's eyes before she could stop them. The quiet man at table 4, the silent fixture of her mornings for 3 years, was gone. She blinked rapidly, trying to collect herself, wiping at her eyes with her apron. I didn't even know his first name was James," she said softly. He was just a customer." But Commander Richards raised his hand, his voice low and kind. "Ma'am, Captain Carter left very specific instructions regarding his personal effects. He had no living relatives, no children, but he did leave a will." He gently placed the flag-draped box on the nearest table. Sarah stared at it, heart pounding, breath shallow. On the top was an engraved nameplate. Captain James T. Carter, United States Navy. Captain Carter served 32 years in the Navy, Richards explained. He was a SEAL team commander, served in numerous classified operations. I can't share the details, but I can tell you he was awarded the Silver Star, 3 Bronze Stars, and 2 Purple Hearts. Sarah stared at the box, tears blurring her vision, trying to reconcile the humble man who sat silently with his coffee each morning with the decorated war hero now being described to her. "He never mentioned any of that," she whispered. "No, ma'am," the commander said, almost smiling. "He wouldn't have. Captain Carter was old-school Navy, quiet about his past. But in his final instructions, he asked that his personal effects be given to Sarah, the waitress at the diner on Route 17, who treated an old sailor with kindness when she had no reason to." The room had gone still. The clatter of silverware, the low hum of morning conversations, all had fallen silent. Every customer in the diner instinctively understood something profound was unfolding. But Sarah didn't feel the weight of their gazes. Her entire world had narrowed to the box, the flag, and the memory of a man she had barely known, but somehow deeply missed. One of the younger SEALs stepped forward, his voice soft. "Ma'am, Captain Carter didn't have family, but he talked about this place, about you. He said, you were the only person who looked at him like he was still worth something." Sarah's tears fell freely now, unashamed. "He was always so polite, so quiet. I just tried to be kind." Commander Richards nodded firmly. "That's exactly what he said, that you probably didn't think you were doing anything special, but to a man who spent the last years of his life mostly alone, your kindness meant everything." He gestured toward the wooden box. "These are his personal effects. There's also a letter he wrote for you and some other items he wanted you to have." Sarah reached out with trembling hands, lifting the box gently from the table. It was heavier than she expected, the wood smooth and warm beneath her fingers, as if it had absorbed sunlight. "Can I?" she asked softly. Of course, ma'am. It's yours now," Richard said. "Has anyone ever walked quietly beside you for so long that you didn't notice how much space they filled? Until they were gone, and the absence became unbearable." That was how it felt now. Sarah slowly unfolded the flag. The 6 SEALs stood respectfully, heads bowed, while the entire diner, every single patron, remained silent. With the reverence of someone opening a sacred artifact, she lifted the lid. Nestled inside, wrapped in soft black velvet, were simple items that told a story she had never been allowed to see. The first thing her eyes landed on was the gray handkerchief, the very same one she had once picked up from the floor. the initials barely visible then. But now, in full view, the embroidery was clear. Ade. Captain James T. Carter, née, U.S. Navy. Below it, an anchor and a seal trident stitched in navy blue thread. Beneath the handkerchief was a sealed envelope. Her name was written across the front in precise, careful handwriting. For Sarah Martinez, who showed kindness to a stranger. There was also a black and white photograph that made Sarah gasp. It was a candid shot taken from across the diner. She was in the frame, pouring coffee at table 4, caught mid-smile. And in the background, nearly obscured by light and shadow, sat Captain Carter, watching quietly from his usual seat. Someone had taken it without her knowing. Likely a Navy friend. Likely months ago. And then, she found a small velvet pouch. Inside it was a medal. Bronze. With a blue and white ribbon. A purple heart. Commander Richards saw her hands still, her eyes wide. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "that's one of 2 Purple Hearts Captain Carter earned. He wanted you to have it." "I can't," she began, overwhelmed. "This belongs in a museum, or with the military, or—" "Ma'am," the younger SEAL said gently, "it belongs with someone who understands what service looks like. He said that in 3 years of coming here, you never once treated him like he was a burden, like he was invisible. He said you treated him like he mattered." Sarah's hands shook as she carefully opened the envelope. The letter inside was handwritten. Neat, but slightly shaky, age evident in the strokes. "Dear Sarah, if you're reading this, then I am gone. These men found you as I asked them to, and I thank them for that. I hope you'll forgive an old sailor for the deception of never telling you who I was. My name is James Thomas Carter. For 32 years, I served my country as a Navy SEAL. I led men into impossible places, and by God's grace brought most of them home. I received medals and commendations that now sit in a drawer, meaningless without the men who earned them beside me. What? But in these last 3 years, the most important part of my day wasn't any mission. It was walking in your diner at 6 a.m. and being greeted by someone who saw me as a person. Not a problem. You never knew that I lived alone. That some days, your smile was the only warmth I felt. You never asked about my limp. Never commented on my silence. Never made me feel like I didn't belong. You simply served my breakfast, kept my coffee filled, and said, 'See you tomorrow, sir,' like you meant it. I watched how you treated others too. How you smiled at the construction workers who tracked mud in. How patient you were with the elderly couple who took forever to order. How kind you were to the tired single mothers who could barely hold their eyes open. You may think you were just doing your job, Sarah, but to me, your kindness was a lifeline. I never had children. My wife and I tried. Life had other plans. When she passed 12 years ago, I thought that would be it for me, that I would leave this world without being remembered. But you gave me something to wake up for. You reminded me I was still human, still seen, still valued. The handkerchief belonged to my father, a World War II veteran. The Purple Heart, one of 2, I earned in a place I can't name for reasons I no longer dwell on. The photo was taken by a SEAL buddy who wanted to see the woman I wouldn't stop talking about. I leave these to you, not because you need them, but because I want them to be with someone who understands what it means to serve. Not with a gun, but with grace. Thank you for seeing me, for remembering me. See you tomorrow, Sarah. James T. Carter. Sarah lowered the letter slowly, her face streaked with tears. Around her, no one spoke. No one moved. The small diner on Route 17 and Cedar Street had just become the most sacred place on earth, I'll say. And at table 4, where a quiet man once sat in silence each morning, the seat was now empty, but the space he left behind was filled with honor, memory, and the quiet, powerful echo of gratitude. If you believe that simple kindness can change a life, type remember, and write their name below. Just one name. So we never forget those quiet moments that mattered most. But because they need someone who understands what service looks like. The words on the page blurred for a moment as Sarah blinked through the tears. Captain Carter's handwriting was steady, yet she could see the subtle tremor of age in each carefully penned letter. Every morning when you came to work, the letter continued, when you treated every customer with respect regardless of how they treated you, you were serving others. You were making the world a little better, one cup of coffee at a time. Sarah's throat tightened as she read on. There is also a separate envelope that my lawyer will give you. I have left you a small amount of money. Not enough to change your life dramatically, but enough to help with your children's education, or whatever you feel is important. Please don't refuse it. An old sailor's final request. The letter, still written in that measured script, neared its end. If anyone ever asks about me, please don't tell them about the medals or the military service. Just tell them I was a man who sat at table 4 every morning and that I never asked for anything, except to be treated like I belong somewhere. Sarah pressed the letter gently to her chest, her shoulders trembling. The last line was signed with solemn dignity. With profound gratitude and respect, Captain James T. Carter, United States Navy, retired. By the time she finished reading, silent tears had streamed down her face. Around her, the entire diner remained hushed. No clatter of silverware, no idle chatter. Every person in the room instinctively understood the weight of the moment. Commander Richards stepped forward and, with the same respectful calm, pulled another envelope from his jacket. "Ma'am," he said gently, "this is from Captain Carter's lawyer. As he mentioned in his letter, he left specific instructions about his estate." Sarah looked up at the 6 Navy SEALs surrounding her, her voice trembling. Was he really as decorated as you said?" The younger SEAL, the one with kind eyes, stepped forward again. "Yes, ma'am. Captain Carter saved my uncle's life in Afghanistan back in 2003. My uncle used to tell us stories about him. Said he was the kind of officer who would walk through hell for his men and never ask for recognition." Commander Richards nodded solemnly. "Captain Carter was a legend in the SEAL community, ma'am. But toward the end, he became a recluse. We were starting to worry about him, frankly. Then he started talking about this diner, about the kind waitress who treated him like family." Sarah folded the letter back into the box, gently laying it beside the handkerchief and the Purple Heart. Her hands hovered over the contents for a moment. "What am I supposed to do with all of this?" she asked softly. Commander Richards didn't hesitate. "Whatever you think Captain Carter would want you to do. He trusted you with his final wishes, ma'am. That means he trusted your judgment completely." The next morning, Sarah arrived at the diner before the sun had fully risen. The air still held the hush of early dawn as she moved with quiet purpose. At table 4, she placed a small framed photograph, the one of her pouring coffee, with Captain Carter barely visible in the background. Beneath the glass tabletop, she slid the gray handkerchief, neatly pressed, and added a placard that read simply, "He sat here and never asked for anything, except kindness." Word spread through the town faster than a fresh pot of morning coffee. By noon, strangers Sarah had never seen before began arriving. They didn't come with cameras or questions. They came with reverence. An elderly woman approached, carrying a small bouquet of white flowers. She handed them to Sarah and said quietly, "My husband served in the Navy. Different war, different time. But I know what it's like when they come home and don't talk about what they've seen." She placed the flowers on table 4, sat across from it in silence for 10 minutes, then left a $5 tip and quietly walked out. A middle-aged man in a construction uniform came in during his lunch break. "Heard about the captain," he said. "Never knew who he was, but I remember seeing him. Always wondered about his story." He ordered coffee, black, and sat at table 4 for exactly the amount of time it would have taken to eat breakfast. Before leaving, he He reached into his pocket and placed a small American flag pin beside the flowers. By the end of the week, Table 4 had become an informal memorial. But it wasn't somber. It was a place of quiet reverence. People brought VFW mugs, military challenge coins, folded notes, photos of loved ones who had served. It became sacred in the most ordinary way. Mike Patterson, the diner's owner, had initially worried the attention might drive regulars away, but instead, it had the opposite effect. People came not out of curiosity, but because they understood. They knew what it meant to honor someone who had served without ever asking for recognition. Sarah became the unofficial keeper of Captain Carter's memory. Customers, new and old, would ask her about him, and she'd speak of his quiet routine, his respectful demeanor, his generous tips. He never complained, she'd say. Never sent food back. Never got impatient when we were slammed. He just sat there, minded his business, and treated everyone around him with respect. A reporter from the local paper once stopped by, hoping to do a feature on the mysterious war hero. Sarah shook her head politely. Captain Carter came here for 3 years because no one asked him questions, she explained. I'm not going to start now. Eventually, Mike made a decision that even surprised himself. He officially renamed the section of the diner where Table 4 sat. A small wooden sign went up reading, "The Quiet Corner, for those who prefer peace to conversation, service to recognition." Soon, the Quiet Corner began attracting a specific kind of customer. Elderly patrons who wanted to enjoy a quiet breakfast, shift workers finishing a long night who needed silence more than small talk, people burdened by life's weight who just needed to sit somewhere without having to explain themselves. Sarah noticed something shift in that corner. Conversations were softer. Eye contact lingered just a little longer. It was as if Captain Carter's presence still guided the space, as if people could feel what it had meant to sit where he once did. Every Monday morning, Sarah kept a personal ritual. She would set Table 4 as if he were coming in, place a cup of black coffee before the empty seat, and let it sit for exactly the amount of time it used to take him to finish his meal. Then she'd clear the table and whisper quietly as she touched the back of his chair. "See you tomorrow, sir." One Monday, a young Navy sailor on leave stopped by. He had heard about the Quiet Corner from someone on base and wanted to see where the legendary SEAL had spent his final years. He sat at Table 4, ordered 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, and black coffee. When Sarah brought him the check, he left $13.50 on the table, $8.50 for the meal, and a $5 bill folded neatly into a perfect square, tucked beneath the edge of his napkin. "For the captain," he said softly before walking out. And Sarah added that folded bill to the growing collection of mementos now permanently displayed at Table 4. Some traditions, she realized, were worth preserving. James Carter had no children, no siblings, no one to visit his grave or speak his name at holidays. But he had Sarah, and through Sarah, he had an entire town that remembered. Because sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness don't begin with words. They begin with how we look at someone. Like they matter, like they deserve dignity, like their presence adds something to the world. Sarah never knew Captain Carter was a hero when she poured his coffee. Never knew the silent weight of his service or the lives he'd saved. She only knew he seemed like a man who deserved kindness. And because she gave it freely, without expectation, Carter left behind something greater than medals. He left behind gratitude, planted deeply in exactly the right place. The money he left her helped pay for her daughter's first year of college, and for dental work her son's insurance hadn't covered. But more than that, it reminded her that kindness is never wasted, even when it feels like it disappears into silence. Asas. 3 years later, the Quiet Corner had become something of an institution. Veterans found their way there. So did anyone who needed a place to sit without being explained or interrupted. Sarah still worked the morning shift, still greeted every customer with the same quiet grace. Only now she understood something she hadn't before. Every person sitting alone at a table carries a story. Every quiet face might be someone's Captain Carter. Every act of dignity might be the only kindness someone receives that day. On the wall behind the table 4, Mike Patterson had hung a simple wooden plaque. It bore Carter's own words, taken from the final letter he'd left behind. Just tell them I was a man who sat here every morning and that I never asked for anything, except to be treated like I belonged somewhere. Beneath that, in smaller letters, Sarah had added, and he did belong. We all do. Subscribe if you believe that some people don't need to speak to deserve being remembered. This is a story from AZN Stories, where honor lives on through the smallest moments.